before in the past, but we've had a lot of people that were not able to join us ask about them. And so I'm going to record this one. I don't know where it will live, but if you do have anyone that missed the meeting and asks you about recordings, we'll either get this up on our website or people can email me and I'll be able to send you a copy of the recording. To get started, my name is Shannon Blankenship, and I'm the currently serving as chair for Resilient Jax, which for those of you that are, maybe this is your first time joining with us, or maybe you've been attending some of our monthly meetings over the course of 2020, we are a coalition of organizations and associations and individuals interested in seeing resiliency, resilient initiatives here in Jacksonville happen and looking to coordinate our efforts in order to propel some of those equitable solutions that we would like to see happen. We formed in the beginning as a way to really try to support the work of the City of Jacksonville's Special Committee on Resiliency, and that committee has progressed substantially over the last few months. And so the second item on our agenda today will be updates from each of the representatives from the subcommittees that are going on to let us know what's going on with that subcommittee. One of the big advances that we've had in the last month or so is that we have a website now, resilientjax.org. And one of the features of the website is a way that you can easily subscribe to continue receiving information from us. So far, we haven't sent out any newsletters or regular communications, but again, just sort of building up the subscription list so that we will be able to communicate with you. My goal is every 2 weeks to send something out that's either related to an upcoming event or just things going on in Jacksonville that you will want to know about, that you will want to participate in or be aware of related to resiliency and climate change here in Jacksonville. One of the things that I'd love to have is, being able to showcase the things that our organizational and association partners are doing, especially when it comes to calls to action. This past week, I was able to send out a call to action from our friends at Solar United Neighbors about some net metering legislation and decision making from JEA. I also had an email from Sean Lahav at the North Florida Regional Council about an upcoming event that they have that they're putting on called Activating a Resilient Future. And I just got that a few days ago, so I'm sharing it all with you now and can send something out as a follow-up to this with that. But the information is in the chat window. I'll actually paste that one more time for anyone who has not yet seen the agenda. And thank you, Denise, for sharing resilientjax.org. That's where you'll go to subscribe and learn more. But with that, thanks to everyone for being here today. And I want to jump right into our featured speaker here. Scott Cordero from National Weather Service and NOAA is going to talk to us about the remainder of our hurricane season and what that means for us here in Northeast Florida, because it isn't over yet. We can see that from the forecast. And I thought that would be a great presentation to sort of kick off this last month of hurricane season. And then after Scott, we'll jump over to our updates from the special resiliency committees. And again, check the chat window for the agenda. But with that, Scott, I will let you get started here and let people know about your presentation today.
Well, thank you, Shannon, for having me. We're going to talk about the hurricane season that we've had so far. And also we're going to talk about what's going on right now. And then we'll take a glimpse into our Northeast past. And speaking of the past, in 2 days will be our 4-year anniversary of Hurricane Matthew, when it occurred and made its closest approach to Jacksonville. So that proves that October could be pretty active. And it also, what's going on right now also proves that October could be pretty active, especially in this type of year. And I'll show you why it's going to remain busy as well as we go through the presentation. Now I got to move forward here. Here we go. Thus far, for the 2020 hurricane season, as of 10/4, we've had 26 named storms that occurred, and basically the Hurricane Center and the Weather Prediction Center had predicted about a very busy active period, but we're probably above that right now by probably about 4 or 5 storms than what they earlier predicted. And we've had 8 hurricanes that have occurred in the Atlantic Basin and also the Gulf of Mexico, including 2 major hurricanes. And I'm going to go over a couple of those major hurricanes as we go through the presentation. On your right-hand side is our season so far of all the tracks that are outlaid over there. And you can see it's been quite busy, and particularly along the Gulf Coast, particularly the Western Gulf and Central North Gulf Coast states has been really busy. We had an earlier maybe scare or brush here in Jacksonville with a storm that everyone had a hard time saying called Isaias during that particular time. And that one, we were very fortunate. It encountered a lot of shear. That means winds are increasing aloft, and hurricanes don't like that. It's like an engine where you need a clean exhaust to go to the very top, and it was sheared apart in what we call asymmetric, where it means the storm was lopsided because the strong westerlies aloft. The west side of the storm wasn't really allowed to form and had dry air coming on the west side. The center was left naked, and on the east side is where all the clouds and thunderstorms were, and never got its act together till it gained latitude and lost the shear that it was battling against when it got to North Carolina. And so that was our close brush this particular year. But our fellow communities along the waterways in the United States have not been so fortunate, and I'll show you that as well. One thing I want to caution about outlooks, sometimes they're not very good, or they are good in terms of the number that they forecast, but they don't tell you where they're going to happen. So just keep that word to the wise. And it only takes one storm to make a really bad year. And I'm going to use an example of 1992. We had only 7 named storms. It was during an El Nino period, which is very unfavorable for hurricanes across the Atlantic Basin. And one community that was changed forever was South Florida, Homestead, Miami area. Really got nailed with a Cat 5 hurricane, and it was one of 7 storms that occurred during that particular year. And so don't base your preparedness on simply the outlook, because it only takes one to really change your community forever. So I just wanted to relay that particular point. Some hazards that I want to relate to. A lot of times in our thinking, the category of hurricane is only based on the wind speed, and there's other hazards associated with that. And when we have a hurricane warning, there's other warnings that are involved as well. We have storm surge warnings, and we also have flood watches and flood warnings. So with the mindset, it's only a Cat 1 or Cat 2, but you may have ample rainfall. You may have some pretty good storm surge, especially if the storm's been brewing out in the Atlantic or Gulf of Mexico for days. It increases a large fetch across the Atlantic. It can bring tremendous storm surge. By the time Katrina at one time was a Cat 5, it actually weakened to about a Cat 2 before landfall, and it still produced a tremendous amount of storm surge in southern Louisiana. So that's an example. Also, tornadoes are a good threat as well relative to the storm. If the storm is moving from south to north, it's always the right front quadrant of that particular storm where the best storm surges and where the best threat of tornadoes are as well. So a lot of times when we're looking at the cone that you see on TV, the dangers and impacts of the storm go well beyond that cone. Sometimes tropical force winds could extend, like Irma, beyond 250 miles. So even though it made landfall, let's say in Marco Island, with that particular storm, the tropical force winds extended 250 miles from the center of the storm. And we got some really good storm surge and also some river surge as well along the St. Johns, particularly in the Riverside and San Marco area, right over there. What happened with Irma in particular for that storm surge, remember we had a lot of swift water rescues, particularly in the Riverside area and San Marco area. For days, we had a preceding nor'easter where winds were being trapped inside, and it acted like a lagoon for the St. Johns River. And then finally, when Irma reached the same latitude as Jacksonville, the winds turned to the south and brought all that trapped water back where it bottlenecks to Riverside and San Marco area, where we had 3 to 5 feet of storm surge on the river in that particular area. So that's different. It's something you got to be aware of. And at that time, it was only a tropical storm. So that's why I say, hey, be careful with the category of storm. And say, a lot of times throughout my career, I have 30 years of my career, I hear it's only a ... And sometimes the community lets their guard down, and it's something to remain resilient. You got to know the other threats and impacts associated with that. And that's an education process. And we speak the gospel from the National Weather Service of preparedness and safety and mitigation. And that's one of the things that we key on, especially in messaging the event to our partners, to emergency managers, to the political officials, and so on. And when we do press conferences as well. So I wanted to share that with you. Threat areas, every storm is different. It's dangerous actually to compare one storm to another, and also how we respond to it, and also how the aftermath looks as well. Now here, we ran out of names. How are the names decided? It's decided at the World Meteorological Organization. They have a meeting every year, and all the bad storms, all the ones that really took lives and had a lot of devastation with infrastructure, a lot of those times those names are retired. And so you can see here, we don't have any names for Q, U, X, Y, or Z. So there's 26 alphabet letters, and you take 5 away, at least 21. And so we've gone through alpha, beta, gamma, delta. And delta was just named today, and it looks like it's moving into through the Yucatan Channel as a hurricane in a couple days, and then heading towards Louisiana as a hurricane. And there's a lot of uncertainty what the intensity is going to be with delta as it moves on up. And I'll get a little bit more into delta a little bit here too. Here's the Greek alphabet for you that maybe don't know it, but after we exhaust all the list, which we have, and we've encountered this in 2005 as well with the record-setting storms over there, with 32 storms during that time. And so you can see it goes all the way from alpha to omega, and we're currently on delta at this particular time. Somebody did ask me once, what happens if you have to retire a Greek name? And what we would do is attach the year after that. What I'm showing here is I had my my GIS team at the National Weather Service in Jacksonville. I wanted to showcase who was under the gun during this hurricane season, either putting out tropical storm warnings, which are highlighted in yellow, and also hurricane warnings. And you can see basically everybody has had, at least in the marine areas that they serve, have had one. Now, if you look on the land masses, if you go from the Big Bend of Florida all the way down to Southwest Florida, it's kind of the only land areas that have not had a tropical storm or hurricane warning. Their outer waters have had it, but they have not. So I thought it was pretty interesting to showcase that all the way from Brownsville all the way to Gray, Maine, or Portland, Maine, we've had some sort of warning of some kind or watch in the particular area. Getting back to tropical climatology, we usually peak September 10th. We start off in June 1st. Actually, we started a little earlier this year. We started May 26th. We did have a little lull. You probably heard of the monster Sahara dust at the beginning of the hurricane season, and it kind of put a lull. It brings a lot of dry air across the Atlantic, and then we picked it back up in July. And so we had a little lull, and typically we peak out about September 10th. I drew a little line there where we are right now in terms of October 4th, and you may see a secondary peak that's in red and yellow there. And it's actually a peak for the the northwest or the northeast Gulf of Mexico, the Central Gulf, and the Florida Peninsula usually realizes a second peak right around mid to end of October. So it's something just to be aware of if you see that secondary type of peak over there. And that on the right-hand side, as you go up the y-axis, it's number of storms per 100 years. That's what the yellow and red stand for. And then on the top is time as we go out throughout the hurricane season. So just to explain what the y and x-axis is for this particular graphic. In July 5th, near the beginning of hurricane season, we had Hannah make landfall, and we had 194,000 people in the Rio Grande Valley. That's in deep South Texas. And we had several inches of rain, widespread flooding, ripped off roofs of homes, downed trees, and we had a storm surge in a little port called Port Mansfield, and it was up to 7 feet. So if you're standing at the beach, it would have been above your head right at the shoreline when that happened. We use mean high water as a proxy when we're at the beach. But when you see storm surge levels from the National Weather Service, we do it above ground level. So there's no question. And mean high water is right at the shore, and that's a proxy for above ground level. And so what you do is if we have storm surge at, let's say, your house, and you look at our inundation maps and it says 6 feet, that we mean 6 feet above the ground where you're standing right now. Because I know that's sometimes confusing with the datums that we use in the past. So probably about 3 or 4 years ago, we transitioned to a new datum that everyone understands, where hey, it's above ground level where you're at. So we take out the elevation and everything else and do it. And that's just with standing water. We don't include a wave action on top of that, which can sometimes double. So it's the swimming pool level, basically, of for storm surge. And they had 7 feet in Port Mansfield. Hurricane Laura, this was our strongest storm of the season. Formed on August 20th, dissipated on August 29th. We had winds of 150 miles an hour associated with it. It landed in southeast Louisiana, where it made landfall as a Category 4, and the estimated damage was $10.1 billion. Actually, if it was about 20 miles to the west, Lake Charles and the bigger cities like Beaumont would have had terrible storm surge. And so usually the best storm surge, actually not usually, all the time, the best storm surge occurs along and to the right of the path of the storm. And so when it went to the east of Lake Charles, it saved all that infrastructure. The damage could have probably been easily tripled or quadrupled if it landed about 20 miles to the west of where it did land. And again, that was a Category 4. Again, some GIS work. Here's a depiction of all the watches and warnings in a close-up, and also storm surge warnings. And sometimes people aren't aware of the storm surge warnings because they don't get the same notoriety or publicity that you get with the hurricane warnings themselves. And so we do issue those. You'll see them on the local news in Jacksonville and all across the media markets across the Gulf Coast and up the eastern seaboard as well. But yeah, we had some coastal storm surge up to 7 to 10 feet in to the east of Beaumont and Lake Charles. And here's how it looks visually. Again, it landed as a Category 4 on August 27th in Cameron, Louisiana. And for brevity, I'm not going to go over all the storms. I'm just going to go over some of the strong storms. And then we had Hurricane Sally. It landed in Gulf Shores, Alabama. And if you recall, in 2004, we had Ivan that occurred. And it occurred on the same date in the same location in Gulfport. One of my coworkers his dad was the sheriff down in Gulfport, or Gulf Shores, Alabama, at the time Ivan went through. And I think that's when George W. Bush took a tour of Ivan after that, and his father had to take him all across town to survey the damage and all that stuff. And although the majority of the impacts remained across southern Alabama and northwest Florida during that particular time, and it really started in the Central Caribbean and moved across the Florida Peninsula down South Florida, and then eventually made its way to Mobile, Alabama, and also affected the Pensacola area as well. here's the rainfall associated with it. We had a lot of inland flooding. You can see how extensive with some of the GIS work here, how far inland, but the big winner was immediately along the coast where the red circle is. Almost 30 inches of rain in Orange Beach, Alabama. So that's another impact associated with that. We talked about storm surge, we talked about rainfall, and we could also talk about inland flooding. And look how extensive the flooding goes into central Georgia, also Alabama, also the peninsula of Florida, or the panhandle of Florida, and also into central Georgia. So it's quite impressive swath of rain. And on the right-hand side, you can see the storm totals associated with that storm. It was actually took its sweet time. The slower the storm moves, if you take its forward speed and divide it out by a certain number of its movement speed, you'll get the approximate amount of rainfall. So it was a pretty slow-moving storm and very powerful storm. Also, here's some of the winds. It was a Cat 2, not a major hurricane, but it was still pretty impressive at Cat 2, with winds topping out at 120 miles an hour at Fort Morgan. It is an elevated platform. When you do have an elevated platform, you got to take into account the friction with land. So the lower you go with your instrumentation, the lower the winds tend to get a little bit because of the friction of the land. Now let's talk about current storms. We have Tropical Storm Gamma right now. And this is you see it's meandering along the Yucatan Peninsula over there. And you can see it's taking its sweet time, and it's going to produce some very heavy rains across portions of southeast Mexico, including Yucatan, Campeche, and Tabasco as well. And you're going to probably see some landslides and significant flash flooding in that particular area. Now, one thing is, after it does a meandering for about 5 days, you see the models on the right-hand side. It's actually going to maybe go up north towards Louisiana in the wake of Delta. And I'll show you where Delta is going to go. I feel sorry for Louisiana this year. That's why I'm talking about it like this. Here's Delta. It formed this morning. They officially named it. It was a Tropical Depression 26 yesterday. And I had to switch up my presentation this morning. I go, all right, they finally named it, and here it goes, and it's Tropical Storm Delta. And you can see once it gets in that just south of the Yucatan Channel, that area between Cuba and the Yucatan, it starts to strengthen into a hurricane. Now, the big question is, when it emerges into the Gulf, how intense is it going to be? If it's more intense, I think it's going to go a little bit right of this track. If it's a little bit more debilitated, it may go to the left of the track. So there's the cone is the cone of uncertainty. And what we do is we form little circles with time that eventually forms the cone. So there's a bigger error as you go further in time. And so that's why you'll see the cone expand with time. And so we do call it the cone of uncertainty. Now, impacts can be wide ranging, where the storm surge, let's say it does make landfall as predicted where it is in that part near New Orleans. Storm surge will be well to the east of that, all the way to the Florida Panhandle, all the way to Pensacola. So those in Florida have to be really cognizant of it. Also, the clouds and the humidity will be increasing over the next couple of days. The reason is we're getting some of that moisture with the southwest wind ahead of the storm, and that's why we've been cloudy, drizzly the last couple of days. Will we get direct impacts? No, but we got a big moisture blob coming in Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, and it'll be sticky again. It'll be yucky. It'll be light rains, and we'll have some thunderstorms again. It won't feel like the nice glass cool that we had the last few days. It's been nice. So enjoy it while you can today. It's going to your clothes are going to stick back on you again. Again, Tropical Storm Delta is formed to the south of Jamaica. And again, it will strengthen as it moves northwest towards the Yucatan Channel on Tuesday night. And then it will emerge into the Gulf of Mexico as a hurricane by early Wednesday. And Delta is currently expected to threaten Louisiana, southern Mississippi, and even the western panhandle of Florida as well. And there's some key messages. Dangerous storm surge for Cuba. Tuesday afternoon, heavy rainfall for Cuba, Jamaica, the Cayman Islands. And then it's forecast by late week as a hurricane towards southern Louisiana. And so what you see on the right-hand side is the probability of tropical force winds, a graphic that we use as scientists and we use with our emergency managements to get on the partners to get on the same messaging page of when those are going to come to the area. And this is the most likely arrival time. We also have the earliest arrival time, the most reasonable early arrival time as well. That's when you typically want to have everything boarded up and everything ready for everybody to evacuate and stuff like that. But the most likely arrival time is probably a conservative one where it's about 6 to 12 hours earlier than what we really expected to come. We just want everyone to be buttoned up at that particular time. And remember the 2005 season, remember the Alamo. We had 28 named storms and 15 hurricanes and seven major hurricanes. And it began on June 8th and went all the way to January 6th, 2006. And that's the one that ended up with Portugal. So we went all the way to Zeta last time when we had that unprecedented season there before. So it looks like looking at the weather pattern the next couple days, or I mean throughout the next 10 days, there is a series of tropical waves that are forming to the south and west of us over the Eastern Caribbean. And it's something to watch out for Northeast Florida, Southeast Georgia, the areas that we serve. It just bears watching. Those tropical waves are going to be moving through the Caribbean, and we'll just have to watch and be vigilant. And hurricane season's far from over. So I'm not saying panic, don't do that, but just be vigilant and watch the next 10 days or so. All right, landfall climatology. This is for Florida now. Tropical storm and hurricane landfalls. And we're looking since 1851, since we kept record. Of course, we've had that with Spanish records before and English records before for St. Augustine in particular. And as you go into Georgia, we have a lot of English records of before 1851. So a lot of times we backtrack and look at that as well. But this is since 1851. August, we've had 47 tropical storms or hurricane landfalls in Florida. And we see an uptick in September. Those ocean waters are really warming up during that particular time. It's 79. Now in October, you may feel the air starting to get a little cooler, but there's a latent follow-up from the waters. The waters take a little bit longer because of latent heat it captures. The specific heat of water keeps it warmer over the water areas. And so in October, you'll see 84 landfalls in Florida in the month of October. And then it really drops off, I say precipitously, probably about November 1st. We start really going down in terms of the activity affecting the state of Florida. This actually, I started this presentation on October 1st before Gamma and Delta. And I was saying, this is the box we need to watch now. And it came to fruition. This is usually the area that we have to watch in October. Later on in November, it tends to be offshore. It tends to be over the central Atlantic. But this is the box to watch, especially in the October timeframe. Especially when you got stuff developing in the Eastern Caribbean, it curves up through either the Straits or through the Yucatan Channel, and it comes into the Gulf. And just something to be cognizant of. The reason is we got what we call available energy available to us, and it's kilojoules. I know it sounds like Back to the Future, but kilojoules, Marty, per centimeter squared is how we measure it as scientists. And you can see how anomalously warm the waters are basically south of Cuba, also in the Eastern Caribbean, or the Western Caribbean, also through the Yucatan Channel as well. So that's an area, that's the fuel, baby, that keeps it going. And so that's one of the ingredients that we need, also the lack of share. And right now it's prime for that. Ocean water, available energy, October through November, it's at its prime. Remember, the specific heat of water is higher. And here's some examples. We had Matthew that developed in that's where the genesis was. Also Wilma, Hattie, and you may not recall Mitch. Mitch actually really affected Nicaragua. and Honduras during that particular time. And it affected a lot of banana crop. There's a lot of landslides. There was a lot of people killed, and Mitch was retired back then. So one thing that I always say, watch out for when we have a category, just an example, let's say we have a category 4 moving at 28 miles an hour. Its forward speed is 28 miles an hour. The storm itself is a Cat 4, about 120 knots. When I talk about those frictional forces, by the time, let's say, it gets to about Lake City, for example, it could still have Cat 3 wind speeds, even though friction has slowed it down. By the time you get to Baker County, it could be a Cat 2. And then when you get into like towards Nassau County, you could still have Cat 1 speeds. So even though it's not coming at us from the Atlantic, and if it's a very strong storm, major hurricane coming at us, it's something to be very cognizant of, especially a fast moving one, which typically happens because of the strong westerlies picking it up. And a lot of times the storm motion is actually, you have one vector paralleling another vector, where the storm motion is paralleling the storm. It's inside the storm itself, so you're adding those magnitudes together. And so that's why that it's possible to have that. All right. October hurricanes, 1851 to 2019. Can you see Florida? Probably barely, but I just wanted to show you October hurricanes. I'm going to zoom in a little bit on this. Is that a little better? Can you see Florida? 1851 to 2009. Now we'll talk about major hurricanes. That's Cat 3 or above. When we go back, that's all hurricanes. This is major hurricanes category 3 or above. You see, it becomes a little bit less dense over the state of Florida, but our history is still pretty rich with that, isn't it? And then I'll zoom in, and you'll see Matthew over there. I circled it in red. It occurred 4 years ago, or 364 days ago in 3 years. So our anniversary is coming up in 2 days, but it's still game on for the state of Florida for even major hurricanes to occur in our area. So it's an education thing. Sometimes people let their guard down. With Matthew, we've had a spell of cool weather like we did right now in late September and October. Sometimes people let their guard down. Don't let your guard down, because those ocean waters are still pretty dang warm. And then I'll talk a lot about Hurricane Matthew. And since it's near the anniversary, I thought it was important to talk about our climatology and also our recent past. And we're very fortunate. I give a presentation I normally give. I call it 20 miles that made all the difference. And I stole a little bit from this presentation to talk to you all today. And our storm surge would have been about 3 to 4 feet higher if it didn't make a jog to the right the day before. It made a whole lot of difference. And we were very fortunate. Also, the storm also weakened a little bit. But the way we were messaging it early on the storm, you probably remember when the track was forecast to be right along the first coast. We were really worried at the National Weather Service. And we relayed that concern with our emergency management and our TV partners as well. And I'm going to show you why we're fortunate. You probably remember this, the hurricane storm tides near Jax Beach, how rough and chaotic the sea was out there. And it coming in all the way to washing into 2nd Street over there in the Jax Beach area. And I understand a lot of neighbors suffered heartbreaking damage, and I want to relay that concerns before I show you this damage. We go out and regularly survey the damage after the storm, and we're very cognizant of people whose lives just got torn apart. And there's a lot of neighbors along our coastal areas, along the river as well, that had significant amounts of damage. Here's Jacksonville and Neptune Beach as well. Here's before and after St. Augustine. I found it on Google Drive, the before part, and then took that with the after part as well. And on the right is Flagler College, and on the left is you're approaching A1A over there. And so a significant amount of damage in St. Augustine as well. Here's A1A and Flagler. For the area that we serve, Flagler was its closest approach. It was about 23 miles away. At one time, it was forecast to be right on top of Palm Coast, so I feel very fortunate. But they had a significant major storm surge in that particular area, about 5 to 7 feet, simply washed away underneath the road, and it shed away during this particular storm during Matthew. But as bad as it was, Matthew just wasn't what I call the big one. I say the same thing about Irma as well. I think a lot of people say, well, I survived Matthew and I survived Irma. It wasn't that bad. I think I'm going to stay next time. Hey, we just had a brush. It didn't have a direct landfall on us at all. So I hear sometimes that in the community where, oh yeah, I'm going to stay next time. Matthew, that's not a big deal. Hey, a weekend, number one, and number two is 20 miles further offshore than we thought. So in the end, it was about 42 miles offshore from Jacksonville, if you think about it. The reason I say 20 miles, it would have been like 3 to 4 feet higher along the coastline and also along the St. Johns River. And it would have been simply devastating for our communities if that happened that particular way. Here's the operational track of Hurricane Matthew. We do an operational track after it's all said and done, and take a pic, and we do the lat long, all the way long, how it is. You can see that jog to the right, and I'm going to zoom in a little closer, see how pronounced this jog was, and you could see it basically really take a hard jog to the right as it's approaching Jacksonville. Thank God. And sometimes you can't predict those wobbles when they do happen. Sometimes it wobbles the other way. And so when you're talking about 4 or 5 days out, you have an average error of about 60 to 100 miles when that happens. So the National Hurricane Center was right on it in terms of all the model data they have to look at. And they actually take a consensus of the models and its correction. So it's very interesting how they forecast over there. They have several models that aren't available to the public as well. And again, the critical period was October 7th and 8th that saved a lot of coastal homes and businesses. This is an example of surge and waves. One of my favorite restaurants, you could bring a pet to it. It was Matanzas Inn restaurant. If you've ever been there, it was a really cool place. You could have a nice lunch, sit out at the beach, bring your pet, bring your dog, and relax and enjoy the beach life, the salt life, as we call it. And so you could see the USGS went out there. They placed sensors a lot of times ahead of the storm, and they placed it in Matanzas Inlet. And you could see all the different lines that are going up and down. And what they do is they take the average of that curve, and you can see the ebbs and wane associated with the waves going. Above that blue line is actually what we call wave action. The blue line is like how you're sitting in a pool that's still. So when we do surveys, we survey actually on the inside of people's garages to see how the pool level height was. It's kind of the standard, the still water site, the still water line. We have to do that inside. But when you go outside of the garage, it's usually about 2, 3, 4, sometimes 6 feet difference between the line inside the garage and the line on the outside of the garage, if their home is in a storm surge area when we do surveys. So we use the still line as a measurement for our database. But you can see the gray lines above the blue line. That's all the wave action on top of that. So sometimes it could be twice the height of the still water height. So just keep that in mind. And we do surveys with the USGS, and on the right corner is the Matanzas Inn restaurant that was over there. They had they had like a mobile home community next to that area, and they had a floating dumpster from the storm surge going through there, just packed with rubbish, but it was still floating away. And it went through the whole neighborhood without touching anybody's home, which I found amazing. It went through the entire neighborhood without touching a mobile home during that particular survey. Again, Hurricane Matthew.
I just want to check in. We do have a few questions. I don't think you'll be able to get to all of them, but I didn't know if you had a final slide or something coming up, and maybe we might be able to do maybe just one question before.
Yes, I'm sorry, guys. I can go on here, but I will move forward. One thing though, you talk about resilience. Water counts for about 90% of deaths. A lot of people think it's the winds. Just wanted to relay that across to you real quick. And there's a lot of things talking about resilience is the aftermath or indirect deaths associated with it. Some people are under duress with heart attacks. Evacuation puts a lot of pressure on people. You get carbon monoxide poisoning. You get candle fires. You get people jumping on ladders to put up things as well. So we also have indirect deaths that are correlated with that. And also AC goes out and lights go out and all that stuff. You can see the ages of indirect deaths by age. A lot of that's attributed to heart attacks and duress. And if you're over 60, about 58% of those deaths occurred with that. And questions or comments, take hurricane seriously, prepare and have a safe hurricane. And does anybody have any questions?
I want to ask you one question, but I also want to ask John Sapora if he'll unmute himself because he had raised his hand. So I want to let him ask one. I don't think we'll be able to get to all of them in the chat window. Scott, if you do have a minute and you want to maybe jump in the chat window and respond to some of them, you can.
Okay.
But one question I wanted to ask, Sarah Boren had asked, do we have categories for winds higher than 180? And I know I've been curious about that myself. Basically, are we prepared for above category 5 storms when it comes to these really high winds that we're seeing?
You know, it's interesting that you say that it was explored by the World Meteorological Organization, and they would definitely be the outlier. In the Atlantic and the Gulf of Mexico, there's a lot of factors that would hard to reach that particular speed. But where I have seen it is with super typhoons out in the Pacific, particularly in the tropical Pacific, when you're talking about like Guam and the Philippines and Indonesia and places like that. Their waters are way warmer than ours, and sometimes they have a lot less shear, and they have reached above the threshold. There's no capstone on top of category 5. And actually the same question was posed for tornadoes as well. It was Dr. Fujita that developed the scale for severe storms. And it was the Sanford-Simpson combo that did it for that. And actually I'm doing a study with the University of Alabama, Tuscaloosa at this particular time on the perception of hurricanes and the categories, and also the San Franciscan, and making it just a function of winds? Can we make it the function of the highest threat? And so just kind of dive off of what you said there. Excellent.
John, if you want to go ahead.
All right, thanks. I am chair of the community organizations active in disaster. So just keep in mind as we prepare and respond to and recover from these events, our coalition can really be a big factor working with the Emergency Management Division. Scott, I have a question. You know, with Hurricane Sally and 20 to 25, 30 inches of rain, just tell us what 20 inches of rain in 30-hour period here in Jacksonville, what would that do? Because I think that would just blow away all of what happened with Hurricane Irma. I think that would be so different than the flooding with Irma, which we all think was pretty severe.
Yes, and you know, we got a glimpse of it. What we did is we had a preceding nor'easter before Irma, Irma dropped 14 to 18 inches, and there was no transition between the nor'easter ahead of the storm and the storm. And if you saw what it did to Clay County and near the Black Creek during that particular time, that was half that amount. And so you have to widen your scope. You know, I think the best example I could give you is Harvey. And Harvey, you know, with Sally, we had 30 inches near the proximity of the coast. But with Harvey, we had a stagnant system that was moving so slow across that area. And it's really a function of wind speed, or forward speed of the storm, I should say. And if the storm just meanders and stays around like Harvey did, it's quite conceivable. Like for Faye, we had similar type of conditions, not Harvey-esque, but that's how it would look. We have a lot of streams river tributaries, estuary systems in our area. And if we got to 30 inches, it would look a lot like Houston during Harvey. And that's probably the only example visually I could really give you. Steve Woodard asked me the same question in Duval, the emergency manager for the city of Jacksonville. And I go, Steve, that's how it will look. If we have they had widespread 25 to 30 inches. When we were talking about Sally, that was one point. It wasn't widespread. Most of it was between 16 and 18 inches immediately along the coast, but 30 was the outlier. But Harvey, that wasn't the outlier. 25 to 30 was pretty regular for a pretty large area. So that's a lot of cubic feet of water that you can't just simply evacuate right away. So that's my best example I could give you is how it would look.
Well, Scott, I want to thank you so much for coming on and joining us today. And again, if you have a minute to answer to some of these chat questions, feel free to. But I know Scott gave us his email on the last slide of his presentation. I'll send that out to everyone as well if you want to follow up and ask him questions. And
most certainly. Now, how do I get to the chat here? Oh, I see it right down here. All right.
a little bit of activity down there, so you'll have
yeah.
there. So as you all know, the city of Jacksonville has a special committee on resiliency that has been meeting for months, just as long really as this special committee has been meeting in order to figure out how to support them, how to advocate for policies, how to make sure that we're participating in that process as best and as fully as we can. The Special Committee on Resiliency earlier this year broke out into 3 distinct subcommittees. And so for many of us, it's a little more challenging now to follow what's going on and the different conversations, because not only do we have a full committee on resiliency, we also have a special committee on infrastructure, which is chaired by Councilman Garrett Dennis, a special committee on neighborhoods, communications, and community outreach that is chaired by Councilwoman Morgan, and then the environmental planning subcommittee, which is chaired by Councilman Matt Carlucci. Randy DeFore serves as the full chair for the Special Committee on Resiliency. So it is a little tough. It's not easy to follow. And we wanted to make sure that in our meetings here with Resilient Jacks, we're giving you as much information about what's going on as possible, so that if you have the time to participate in any of those individual processes, maybe you can sort of get a little leg up on what's being discussed. And then also, you can hear from our speakers today, Lisa King, Brooks Andrews, and Ashantae Green, if you want to reach out to anyone individually to follow up with some of those questions. So I will now introduce Lisa King, if you want to jump in and let us know about the infrastructure subcommittee.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Shannon.
Hey.
Hey, thanks for inviting me to share with you today. I was very honored to be included in the infrastructure subcommittee. I come at this as a former planning commissioner. So we've met, I think this will be our 5th meeting, which will be Thursday. And our initial work was an attempt to look at the budget that was currently being discussed and see if there were any projects in the CIP that we needed to try to move forward, or things that could be reprogrammed, but funds that could be moved around so we could put some new projects in. And we came to the conclusion really quickly that the budget process was just too far along for us to, in a comprehensive way, present a suite of new projects. And so we moved on from that kind of work effort. And presently, we're reviewing the legislation by the Adaptation Action Area Working Group for comp plan amendments. And we're vetting those today at 5. Our comments are due back to the committee, and we will be discussing those thoughts on Thursday at our meeting, which starts at 8:30. So far, I've just been kind of looking to see if what comments have come in from other resource experts. And I'm not seeing a whole lot, and the ones that we've gotten, folks have been very supportive of what they already see. So I'll give you my back of the envelope political person analysis of what's going on with that. Is that particularly the boundaries of the new adaptation action area, that's probably the biggest change that we'll see to our community. And that the work group put in hours and hours and hours and months and months and months of coming up with a really good, balanced, not everything that everybody wanted kind of approach to that. So the legislation itself will probably not be that controversial. Where the controversy will come is when it's implemented. And once, the comp plan is amendment, but then as that rolls out in further regulation. And that's really where y'all's involvement and support early on in this process will be helpful as we move into the things that will really move our community forward in trying to prepare and protect our citizens from flood damage and other impacts of storm systems as they move through our community. And so I appreciate you and your work. This is a subject, and I think it's interesting, I think the Infrastructure Committee was a bit of a microcosm of any group that tries to work on this, is there is a lot of a chicken or an egg. It's like, well, we have to have a plan and we all have to be in agreement before we can actually start to implement. And I think that's where we kind of got caught up with our original efforts to try to fast forward some projects in this budget year, because the folks that are going to make these decisions are all elected officials who have to answer to the voters, and folks who have had their homes flooded already in Matthew or Irma or both, and they want action now. And in a city of this size with this much water running through it, it's really difficult to do that and not feeling like you're picking favorites or being haphazard or not, frankly, perhaps wasting money on something that looks good, feels good, but really isn't either comprehensive enough or doesn't really address the problems that need to be addressed. So that's why that an organization like yours, who brings so many stakeholders together and makes sure that everybody's aware of what's going on and keeps everyone on the same page, is really, really important as we move through. Because when the average citizen who is not that attuned to these issues starts to hear about this, will be when maybe their real estate agent says to them, oh, you don't want to buy this house because of XYZ. Or, you're having to pay more for this because of XYZ. And that's how the public then is educated about these efforts, and frankly, perhaps not in the most accurate fashion. And so it's important that y'all are out there making sure that folks know what's going on. So thanks, y'all. I appreciate being here.
Thank you, Lisa. And if anyone has more questions specific to the Infrastructure Committee, some of the things they have going on, you're welcome to reach out to Lisa. I'm also going to post a link to all the subcommittees so that you can see the agendas, the upcoming meetings, the videos from the previous meetings, and you can get up to speed if you want to do that. Again, though, it's time consuming, and so that's why we're having everyone here today to kind of give a high level statement of where we're at. Brooks Andrews, if you want to go ahead and share your screen, if you're still planning to use the PowerPoint, then let us know what's going on with environmental planning.
Sure, Shannon, thank you. I think I'm just going to speak since we need to kind of speed up here rather than sharing my screen. As Shannon indicated, this is the subcommittee that's headed up by Councilmember Carlucci. Councilmember Carlucci, some of you may know, initiated the entire special committee on resiliency several months ago, and then he moved on to lead the finance group for City Council and has turned it over to Randy DeFore. But he's come back in and will lead this particular subcommittee. We've divided it up into 3 working groups, which I think is very valuable based upon hazards. Hazard 1 being sea and river level rise, hazard 2 extreme precipitation events and rain pattern changes, and hazard 3, mean temperature increase and heat waves. We think that this is the best way to sort of divide and conquer, if you will. And then we've got a little bit of what I call oversight or cross-functional focus for each of those 3 hazards as it relates to land use planning and environmental justice. Because at the end of the day, both of those areas have to be effectively addressed if we are to make any headway on these 3 hazards. Just to give you an idea, we've got about 20 subject matter experts that are working in these 3 areas. Hazard 1, their focus right now is on tributaries that are vulnerable and at risk. Shorelines, we just had a very, very good presentation done a couple weeks ago by an individual who heads up the GIS Shorelines, Living Shorelines Initiative across the state, who has driven a great project for Tampa Bay, which is not unlike Jacksonville in terms of their shorelines. That presentation gave us a lot of great ideas. Hazard 2, the focus being precipitation events, looking for ways to be more effective with our stormwater uptake. In particular, looking at how we best increase our tree canopy and increase the species of trees in the county that will accept more water. We had an excellent presentation, a study that was in fact done for Jacksonville called Trees for Stormwater Uptake, and that was presented to us a few weeks ago, where we have pulled a number of great ideas for potential implementation. And the last group, mean temperature increase and heat waves. Again, the whole tree thing and our canopy is critical for that. They are also looking at pavement alternatives and ways to get a handle on rising temperatures in Jacksonville, particularly in those underserved areas. Some other presentations that we've had, we certainly looked at the AAA report. That's one of the first things that we did. Had another presentation on the impact on property values and taxable income for the city if we don't do something about these areas that continue to flood time and time again. This Thursday, I would encourage you to listen in if you'd like to at 4 p.m. We have representatives from JEA coming to speak to everything from septic tanks to stormwater management, solar power and net metering, diversification of fuel sources. So it's going to be a very, very important meeting to see whether we can partner a bit more with JEA to help drive some decisions that are going to more favorably impact environmental planning going forward. Just to give you a little bit of a timeline, what our 3 working groups now are doing behind the scenes is pulling together their set of observations, which hopefully by the end of the year can then be brought to the full special committee on resiliency, and then to our council members and our attorneys that are supporting us to look for ways to turn that into legislation and ordinances or ordinance edits and updates. Okay, thank you, Shannon.
Thanks, Brooks, for that. Ashantae, if you are ready, maybe you can let us know what the Communications Committee has been focusing on.
Yes, hello everyone. I am Ashantae Green, happy to be here. So I serve on the Environmental Planning Subcommittee as well as the Community Education and Outreach and Neighborhoods Subcommittee. That one is chaired by Councilwoman Joyce Morgan, also co-chaired by Councilmember Boylan. The point of that subcommittee is to disseminate the information from the other subcommittees to make sure that we are presenting it to the community in a way that they can receive it no matter where they are. So just like the other subcommittees, we have been meeting actually since, I think, July, and it has evolved over time, and we've been doing a lot of great things. So just to give you guys a snapshot of where we've been and where we are now, early on, we realized that we needed to kind of divide and conquer to get some of these things done. So the subcommittee actually broke up into subcommittees, and we started by having a editorial and reports group, a assets group, and then a media and community outreach group. Each of those subcommittees is pulled together with different subject matter experts with backgrounds in those areas. That way the assets group can pull together community assets and individuals and organizations that need to receive this information and push it out, as well as the editorial group can actually write up those papers and those documents that can then be shared as well. And then the outreach and media group, which I'm a part of, will push the information out to the community in the different ways that we all learn and receive. Last meeting, we had a great presentation by Scott Ennis. I think that's how you pronounce your last name. He's here today, and he actually showed us a really awesome tool that you can create a map within the Google Maps platform that you can pinpoint specific issues or drop pins to show where flooding is happening and how solutions are happening as well. We had a presentation as well that talked about the grant money that we received for community outreach and education. So far, the Parks Department, let me get the exact name, I have it written down here. Give me one moment. Yes, the Planning and Development Department, they gave us a briefing on the ordinance 2020-526E, and it was the appropriation of the $60,000 grant that the city of Jacksonville received from the Florida Resilient Coastlines Program. And that money is currently going to be used to create 7 workshops that will educate the community on resiliency efforts. So the plan with those workshops is to have them in each CPAC district, as well as to have one for elected officials. And then just to start January, February of next year, they're currently looking for a consultant to help push that out. And then aside from that grant money, we are currently exploring different ways to get the information out there. And I'm actually giving a presentation at the next meeting, which is the 8th at 11 a.m. about what other cities are doing to outreach for resiliency. So Jacksonville, we are in a great place to move forward. And I'm a firm believer in not recreating the wheel if we don't need to, and doing some research about what other cities are doing and try to replicate some of those models, especially if they have similar issues that we face here. So that's where we are. We're looking at the workshops, as well as possibly using social media, newspapers as a vehicle. And lastly, Sean LaHave of the Northeast Florida Regional Council is putting together a newsletter that will be accessible very soon to push out the information to kind of recap what all of the subcommittees are doing, so we can make sure that everyone is receiving the information in the way they like to receive it. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ashantae, for that update. And again, I'll send out a link for all the different special committee meetings. But what's great about what they're doing right now is that they're all recorded. They're all accessible to attend virtually live. They're having breakout sessions and everything's running really smoothly. So it's a great time to be able to jump in and participate, which is what Resilient Jacks is all about, trying to facilitate that and give you guys the information and tools that you need to help us advance resiliency in Jacksonville. Ashantae gave us a great segue to our next speaker, and I'd encourage you guys, if you have some questions for our speakers, to stick around. We'll get to Q&A in just a minute, but we do have 2 more speakers that are going to give us some quick updates on things they have going on that I think you guys are going to find interesting. And Ashantae mentioned Scott Ennis from Riverside Avondale Preservation and their Transportation and Infrastructure Subcommittee, and what they're doing to get their mapping accessible to different communities. So Scott, I'm going to let you come on and share your screen and tell us about the work that RAP is doing.
Great, thanks Shannon. So let me share my screen here. All right, so just a brief background. I am a stormwater engineer here in town. I'm a member of Riverside Avondale Preservation Society's Transportation and Infrastructure Subcommittee. So this effort was a part of my work with that subcommittee. The RAP put out a request to the neighborhood maybe a year ago for people to start sending in images of flooding that they've seen in their areas. And so RAP then compiled all these images and asked our committee, our subcommittee, to develop a map so that this information could be visualized and shared. So what I did was I developed a Google map. And if you haven't done this before, it's very simple. I'm going to show you, and you don't need to necessarily take notes here, but it's just good to know that this can be done very quickly, and it's also free, which is nice, not particularly technical. So maps, I've already got the map created, so I'm just going to open the one that's already made, open in my maps. So this is the starting, or this is essentially the starting point. This is where you would edit the map. What's interesting or useful about this is that people sent their photos in, and you can save them inside a pin. So it's a very basic way to save a location with an image. You can add text to document additional, let's see if I can find a good example. Here you go, I added the date. You can also add more than one photo for a pin. So this is nice on its own, just to visualize where we're seeing real flooding. And it can be embedded in a website, which is helpful. We haven't done that yet, but I think that'd be a great way to share the information. What I really like to do is then take it a step further, which is you can export it to a KMZ file, which is just a Google Earth file. And when you pair it with, so when you open Google Earth, you can open more than one file at a time. So I've opened the KMZ file that I exported from Google Maps, and I also opened a free KMZ file from FEMA that has all the flood zones. So then you can see where we are seeing, where we have real flooding that we've witnessed and where the flood zones are, and then you can pull some analysis from that. So the pins that are located in flood zones, we can't definitively say, but it's likely those are related to surge, the river backing up. The pins that are located, a good distance away from that, may be more of a conveyance problem. Maybe the pipes are damaged or clogged, maybe there's just not enough inlets. Could be a number of things, but it's a good way to track where we've seen flooding. And I think it would be useful if other areas did this, if there was a citywide effort. It could be developed further. We could color code it by year if you wanted to track it over time. There's a lot that can be done, but this is something that is relatively new for us, and we're going to continue to update it and see where it takes us. So far, we've had a pretty good reception. The city appreciated it. I presented to the, well, Ashantae mentioned, I presented the subcommittee. It seems to be received well. So I think it's a good communication tool for residents in the city to really track where problem areas are. And if you want, I can also talk about floodfactor.com. I know we discussed that.
Yeah, if you could, and could you also maybe mention why did you guys create this map in the first place? Like, what was the intent behind putting it all together? And then if you just want to maybe plug what Flood Factor can do for people too when they're thinking about the mapping that's out there for some of these things.
This was started, my understanding is the reason for it was that there's just so many flooding issues in the neighborhood. And I don't think people were getting the reception that they felt they deserved, or the attention they felt they deserved from the city. And it's hard to argue when you see it all put together like this. So this makes it very evident that there's a problem, and you can really see where the problem areas are. And it's just a good starting point for the city to start taking this more seriously, which I think they are. But I think that's what drove it. I can't speak for RAP as a whole, but that's my impression. Yeah.
That's great.
And flood factor, so I can show it to you. It's very helpful. It's just a website. I'm not affiliated with it, and I don't use it professionally, but I've looked at it a little bit since it has come up. Basically, it's a website where you can plug in any address, your home, and it'll show you for a specific property the flood risk, and it's interactive. You know, you can scroll through. It gives you visuals, how bad a flood would be. So it's really good for non-technical people, layman people, to really visualize and understand what kind of risk they're at. A couple of things I'll mention. I think Lisa King mentioned people starting to take flooding seriously when they're looking to buy and sell property, buy and sell homes. Flood factor is actually now integrated into realtor.com. So what she said is very, very true. People will see this information when they're on realtor.com, and it would likely impact whether they bought a piece of property. So that is very interesting. And the only other thing I'll point out, it's very similar to FEMA. You're going to find a lot of the same flood information. It's not the exact same. So this is developed, as you can see here, by First Street Foundation. They have their own model. I don't know a lot about them, but it seems to reflect FEMA. I think it may be even a little more conservative, so maybe it shows things a little more dire. I don't know. I haven't looked at their model. It seems to be a very useful tool. It communicates things maybe a little bit better than FEMA. FEMA is a little technical for people to look at. The visuals are pretty helpful on this website. So overall, I think it's a very helpful website. But just keep in mind, it's not FEMA, so it's not the official standard, I guess you could say.
Sure. Well, thank you, Scott, for
Shannon,
Yeah,
can I want to add one thing, that when it's pretty simple the way that we started with it. We just put out a thing on social media and said, if did you have any flooding? And if you did, could you send us some pictures and some date and time? And that's how we started it. So it's really pretty elementary, but very effective.
Yeah, and I think that's what I was going to mention. We got some questions about that in the chat. So maybe Scott, if you'd be willing to, or Margaret, respond to folks with how they might be able to submit photos to you, or how they could submit photos to the map, and then also where they can either find the map or how accessible it is to the public, or whether it's more internal use. I think some of the questions were sort of around that, and I know there's some technical aspects to this, so you might want to give that
Sure.
feedback there.
Absolutely, I'll do that.
Yeah, Scott, you want to take that then? Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I want to, we have a few minutes left here, and jump over to our final speaker, Carol Bailey White with Duval Audubon Society, that's going to give us some updates on one of their really exciting campaigns that I'm excited to share with everybody. So Carol, if you want to take it away, thank you. Go ahead and tell us about this.
Awesome. Thank you, Shannon. I appreciate it. I'm sharing my screen, and here we go. Can everybody see that presentation?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So a little bit of a departure from what we've been talking about up till now, but it's a new campaign that we at Duval Audubon Society are pretty excited about. So we just wanted to kind of share this information with everybody. So what you're looking at is a NASA map of the United States at night. I don't know when this was taken, but you can clearly see huge blotches of light pollution. And you can see actually even where Jacksonville is, of course. We're a smaller blotch, but we're still a pretty big blotch. Our parent organization, Audubon, National Audubon Society, has a nationwide Lights Out program where we're trying to encourage people to turn off their lights at night to save the lives of migrating birds. So that's like the origin of this project. And Duval Audubon Society and St. Johns County Audubon Society and the Jacksonville Zoo have gotten together in a partnership for this campaign. So let me just talk a little bit about the why. So this map is a map that's available from a site called Birdcast. And Birdcast is run by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. I don't know if everybody's aware of them, but they actually use weather radar they can actually see birds flying at night on weather radar. And so they do these wonderful maps. These are actually animated, but this is just a screenshot of a map that was published last Friday at 5:30 in the morning. And you can see that at that moment, they were estimating about 10,000 migrating birds per kilometer per hour were passing over our area. So you can kind of see us. There's a green dot that indicates a weather radar station right at Jacksonville. And just judging by the color scale, you can see that approximately at least 10,000 migrating birds per kilometer per hour were passing over our area. So the issue of light pollution is a really difficult challenge for birds. So just to go back a little bit, so every year, billions and billions of birds fly thousands of miles as they migrate north to their breeding grounds in the spring and south to their wintering grounds in the fall. They face many, many hazards on their journey. They face predators, bad weather, which kind of sort of relates to what we've been talking about this whole time. Stopover habitat destruction due to development, because they do need to stop and refuel and rest. Also food availability disruptions due to climate change, because the timing of when their food becomes available is actually changing. But one of the biggest threats is brightly lit night, buildings and cities at night, especially for songbirds, because songbirds are actually the ones that mostly migrate at night. So birds that are migrating at night, let me go to the next slide. Birds that are migrating at night, they use the stars as well as the Earth's magnetic field to migrate. And the issue with visually using visual cues to migrate is these bright lights that are in the cities. They can cause the birds to become disoriented. And once they become disoriented, they can either be thrown off their migration path entirely, which leaves them vulnerable to other dangers like the predators and lack of food and water, et cetera, that I was talking about. And they also can collide with buildings. So you may be aware that up to 1 billion birds are killed each year from collisions with windows or buildings. And so it is a real issue for our biodiversity and for our bird populations. And of course, that's one of the main things that Duval Audubon Society cares about. And the issue is there's an easy way to prevent that. And I'll talk about more of that in a minute. And so it's not just tall buildings either. It's not just big cities with big skyscrapers. Actually, medium-sized buildings are the majority of the mortality rate. Buildings that are 4 to 11 stories tall, and residences. About 44% of bird fatalities because of window strikes and building strikes, 1 to 3 stories tall, are actually a source of bird mortality. And the high rises are really less than 1%. And the reason why is because there's just so many more residences and smaller buildings. There's just not that many high rises. So it's a matter of numbers. So this is what our project, is about. Initially, we're trying to inform the residents, the business owners, building managers, elected officials about the dangers that bright lights can pose to migrating birds. Audubon has a program called the Audubon Lights Out program. I think I mentioned it. And there's many cities, big cities, that have already signed on and are participating in this. So for example, Chicago, Baltimore, I'm trying to think of who else I know of, Charleston, Atlanta, definitely. These cities all have very robust lights out programs, but there is none in the state of Florida. There's not one at all. So we really wanted to start one and make it happen. And luckily the zoo and St. Johns County Audubon were willing to partner with us on it. So there's two components with this program. There's sort of a public information, sharing component, which is what I'm doing right now. We have social media posts planned, and we're probably gonna have some articles printed in local media, et cetera. There's a second component that is kind of down the road a ways. It's a data collection component that will engage volunteers to essentially walk around and count dead birds in specifically chosen locations that could possibly be, bad locations for birds, particularly dangerous locations for migrating birds. But that's down the road. We don't have a lot of planning around that yet. Right now, we're just trying to inform the public because we're right in the middle of fall migration season. Typically goes from fall migration for songbirds typically goes from late August, I would say, up until early November. So we're like smack dab in the middle of it. And this is a photo that I took literally just the other day of a migrating magnolia warbler that is not here all year round. It's only here during migration, and it was passing through, and I was lucky enough to see it. But at any rate, so what can you do to help? You can turn off your lights at night during the darkest part of the night between, say, 11 p.m. until 6 a.m. just during the months of migration. So in the springtime, maybe March through May, in the fall, generally September through November. If you have outdoor lights, direct your outdoor lights to point downward instead of upward into the sky if at all possible. If you have outdoor floodlights, you can switch to a timed light or motion sensor lights, which are even better. And you can encourage the businesses that you frequent to turn off their lights or reduce the amount of time their lights are on at night. And if you care about this, you can share our messages and graphics. I have, in the next slide, I have a link to where you can get all of the messages and graphics and use our hashtag Lights Out for Birds. So here's all the links, and I guess I can copy those into the chat window or send them to you afterwards. That might be easier. But anyway, so you can look at Birdcast. Our Lights Out Northeast Florida website is right there, jacksonvilledoo.org/lights-out. There's our link for the messages and graphics to share. You're very welcome to do that. It goes to a Google Drive, and you're very welcome to share these messages. We'd appreciate it if you could. There's the website for the Audubon Lights Out program and the American Bird Conservancy information on glass collisions. And there is my personal email with Duval Audubon, but there are other contacts. I am not like the main contact. But anyway, that's all I have.
Well, thank you very much, Carol. I think, first of all, these graphics are so good. I hope that everyone will consider taking this Lights Out campaign and sharing it, because, even though it might be specific to migratory birds, right, it encourages us to turn our lights off. And I think that, the point of this coalition and having all of us come together is that we have interests that, even though they may be individual, there are co-benefits for all of us. And so for an organization trying to think about how to be more resilient and how to reduce our impacts on climate change, turning our lights off is a great thing to do. And if it also helps birds, then that's a great thing too. And if we can also help our partners, then that can benefit all of us. So I'm definitely going to share this on our Resilient Jacks Facebook page if anyone wants to check that out. But with the remaining time here, we had a lot of people that wanted to share updates or had some questions. And James Richardson, I want to start with you because you had messaged about it, and just use the remainder of our time today with anyone that has updates for the rest of the group. James, if you want to unmute yourself, go ahead. Thank you, Carol.
Thank you. And I will not take up everyone's time. I did just want to, I hope everyone has seen publication about the two ADAPT events that we're partnering with WJCT and the Regional Council to present. I did want to mention one other. We're in the process of finalizing communications around it. Typically, the State of the River report is released at our annual symposium, which we had to cancel this year. So we are doing something similar to the ADAPT webinars, if you will, where we will be releasing it virtually online in 2 parts. On October the 22nd, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, we're going to have a panel of 5 scientists that's going to talk in a little bit of detail on several of the sections of the report. And then later that evening at 7 o'clock, we're going to have a panel discussion with a local advocate, a regulator, a scientist, and an elected official to talk about the state of the river, if you will. So look for more information on that coming up, okay? Probably it's going to be on WJCT.org on their events page, but hopefully once we get it firmed up, we'll be sending something out via email and hope that you all will share it and most importantly, register and participate. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. I don't see any other raised hands, but are there some more folks that either want to share or have questions for any of our speakers today? I know most of our speakers are still on. If you do have questions, feel free. Ooh, Ashantae has a reminder to register to vote. Today is the last day. If you did not know, she is running for soil and water in group 4. So vote for Ashantae Green for soil and water. And thanks, Ashantae, for being here today and plugging that for all the other candidates too. One update from Resilient Jacks that I'll give real quickly. And again, anyone raise your hand if you have something that you want to share. But we sent out a candidate survey to everyone running for office in Northeast Florida about their thoughts on climate change. It's a little more specific than that. I didn't ask them their thoughts on climate change, but what I'm going to do with that is share the candidate responses on our blog page of our resilientjacks.org. So that's just one more thing that you can find on the website there. I'll also be happy to share the presentations from our speakers today so you guys can follow up regarding any of the presentations. Josh Rosenberg, go ahead.
Hey everyone, I really loved today's meeting. It was awesome. Thank you, Shannon, for getting all these awesome people here. I just wanted to let everybody know I'm doing a food forest, community food forest design class this weekend that has been graciously sponsored by a nonprofit called Wealth Watchers. They have sponsored 10 spots. So if anyone is interested in going, I think I have a couple more spots left. My class is going to teach you how to design a space. It could be any space. You know, this particular space is a client who wanted to create a space for a community to come in and use it for gardening and a food forest and some food resilience. So I'm going to teach a class on how to develop those skills. It doesn't have to be for the community. It could be just for you. But I just wanted to put out there and let everybody know that is what I'm doing. And I hope to see some of you there. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Josh, with Native Jacks. Sarah Boren with USGBC. Do you want to, you feel free to go next.
Great, thanks. Shannon, I was just following up on a prior kind of inquiry you had about a candidate forum. Was there any interest to host one, or were there enough partners?
So that's unfortunate. I had so many resources pulled together to be able to do a candidate forum. It was called Title Town Hall. Rethink Energy Florida has done them in the past, and we could have done one here in Northeast Florida, but I did not get enough response from even a moderator. Unfortunately, that's kind of where I started, was wanting a moderator, but the time of year was so busy, which we all know that, right? But the time of year was so busy that the dates were too conflicting, and then there was just too many other things already going on. I do know that League of Conservation Voters or maybe League of Women Voters. I'm so sorry if I don't remember which one, but they are doing a candidate forum with WJCT. And so I might reach out to them about participation with a climate change question, but unfortunately we won't be holding our own candidate town hall. I will release the candidate statements regarding climate change, but no climate change forum for, at least from Resilient Jacks in October. And I don't know of any other ones. If there are, feel free to let me know about them. There's none on my radar.
Okay, yeah, we were thinking about it and was happy to partner with anybody, and I figured you were already on top of it. So,
I tried. Couldn't make it happen this year. There's some more hands raised if anyone wants to go next.
I will, if that's okay.
Yeah. So I think I saw two. So go ahead, Denise.
Hi, everyone. I'm Denise Reagan from the Garden Club of Jacksonville. And I just wanted to invite you all to an event that we're having. I'm putting the link in the chat right now. It's the Nina Cummer birthday picnic. It is to celebrate her actual birthday, which is October 16th. And one of the coolest things about this is that we're going to unveil a very early draft of our entire landscape design. And we're looking for feedback, and it includes a very different use of our parking lot, turning it into a river-friendly space that will be much more resilient. And so we would love to have you all come and look at it and give your feedback, because this is the desire that the Garden Club has for being a model of the kind of space that should exist on the river, and being, you know, the model that others can follow. So I hope you all can come and check that out.
Thank you, Denise. I don't see any other hand raised. I will do a final plug with my Riverkeeper hat on, and we're continuing our River Rising Solutions webcast series. Our conversation this week on Wednesday at 4 p.m. will be with Dr. Lisa Chambers of University of Central Florida, talking about not just wetlands for flooding, but for carbon sequestration, and specifically linking how wetlands hold much more carbon than we even know and understand, but also she's got some really fascinating insight on how wetlands can evolve and change over time. And also we have a few questions for her about stormwater ponds serving as wetlands. So I know a lot of you are interested in, in landscape type of issues. And so that will be a really interesting one. Yeah. And thank you, Jimmy, for sharing the link there. Our last episode was with Aliki Moncrief of Florida Conservation Voters about voting as a solution to climate change. And in case you did not know, that is the quickest and most reliable and fastest way to get resilient policy solutions is by having candidates that believe in climate change and will speak up for climate change serving in elected leadership. So feel free to check out the recording from that presentation. It was a really good one, and tune in the future. For just final comments today, thank you so much to the Resilient Jacks Steering Committee, Denise Reagan, your support in helping build out our new Resilient Jacks website. If you haven't already subscribed, feel free to go in and do that now, because we'd love to start using the newsletter feature and getting information about all these fun, exciting campaigns and events out to you through the newsletter instead of through my personal email. So excited to jump over to that. But again, follow us on Instagram and Facebook so we can build up more conversation there. We appreciate everyone tuning in, the entire steering committee. Message me with anything that you want to make sure that I share content-wise with the group. But other than that, I will check you all out next month with some more topics about resiliency in Jacksonville. So have a great day.
Thank you.